And good afternoon, and thank you, Linda, for inviting me to the library here on Zoom. My name is Evan Weiner, and I am been in this business of covering sports in the 1970s, 1980s. I covered news, and as a speaker, I also used to speak at That Guy's Place over in Montclair, New Jersey. That guy is Yogi Berra. This is a picture from April of 2006, and probably some of you had these baseball cards or would like to have a Willie Mays baseball card or Yogi Berra baseball card, Whitey Ford over there, Larry Doby, who is Yogi's good friend, Casey Stengel, Frank Torrey, Joe Torrey's brother, Roger Maris, Joe Morgan down there. Baseball and the culture. Yogi was a big part of the baseball culture in the 1950s. Certainly every year, almost every year, the Yankees were in the World Series except for 54 and 1959. And then Yogi became a pitchman and was all over TV, whether it was selling beer or selling cereal, or Yogi at the movies. Yogi was a movie critic at some point. My friend Jim Williams down in Baltimore, when they were down in Houston together, they used to do a segment called Yogi at the Movies, which took off, and you were able to see that here in the New York area. Baseball has been ingrained in the American culture, well, probably since 1888. In 1954, there was a French philosopher who wrote a series of essays. His name was Jacques Barzun, and he said, whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn baseball, and do it at a sandlot game, or do it at a high school game, or do it at a minor league game. You don't necessarily have to go to a major league game. Or Tom and I were talking prior to we starting here. He learned his baseball by listening to it on the radio when Red Barber was your good friend, or Mel Allen was your friend, or Russ Hodges here in New York, or Lindsey Nelson. Baseball in the culture, go back to 1888, and there was a guy by the name of Ernest Thayer, who wrote a poem called Casey at the Bat. Now, I was in fourth grade in 1964, 1965, PS 151 in Woodside, Queens. I had a teacher by the name of Miss Alexander. She was in her 60s, although we all thought that she was about 130 years old. She had the blue hair, she had the white blouse, she had the blue skirt, she had the napkin or the tissue tucked in here in case I guess she had to blow her nose. And she gives us an assignment, and the assignment is simple. Read Casey at the Bat, because it's probably the opening of the baseball season in 1965, and I'm 9 years old. And she gives it, and we're supposed to write our response to Casey at the Bat after reading it. And I wrote, he was a lousy player, struck out with the game on the line. There's no joy in Mudville. The mighty Casey struck out. He must have been a lousy player. Oh, no, 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 no. You don't understand. You don't understand. It's about man. It's about man who's set up for success, and sometimes man fails. I'm thinking to myself, no, he's a lousy player. Struck out, game on the line, game's over. No joy in Mudville, and the mighty Casey struck out. I still think I'm right. Although I have had other teachers tell me, no, 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 it's about man's failures. I said, yeah, he struck out. Ernest Thayer was a columnist with the San Francisco Examiner between 1886 and 1888. I have one thing in common with Thayer. I was a columnist or wrote op-ed pieces for the San Francisco Examiner in the 21st century. So that's the only thing I really have in common with Thayer. But I put my name on my stuff. He didn't on Casey at the Bat. Probably just a throwaway that he just put together. There was no real need to analyze what happened. He writes this poem, they put it into the paper, he doesn't take credit for it, and that's that. I know I've written a lot of stuff where it's throwaway for me, and I wouldn't want anybody to analyze anything what I wrote there, but somebody's got to do that, right, for English. So Casey's printed June 3rd, 1888. No author's credit. But Thayer would read the poem at a Harvard class reunion in 1895. Who was Casey? Well, we don't know. Could have been King Kong Kelly, big star in New England back in around that time, and Thayer would probably have been familiar with him. Could have been somebody who played in Stockton, California, when Stockton was just a little outpost in California with hardly any people. But the Stockton team today, its nickname is the Mudville Nine, an homage to Casey. But we really don't know who Casey is. But we do know that Casey becomes prominent in American society, particularly on the vaudeville circuit because of this guy, DeWolf Hopper. DeWolf Hopper, you might know his daughter if you're of a certain age. His daughter was Heather Hopper, who was a gossip columnist, who herself was an actor at some point, and she followed in the family tradition. But Hopper gets a hold of this poem, and I'm not sure how he got a hold of it. Nobody seems to know, but San Francisco certainly was not a big city back in 1888, and it was more of an outpost there, and it wasn't that far from Virginia City at that point, and Sutter's Mill, which gold was discovered 40 years earlier or something like that. But he gets a hold of this poem, and he says, I could put this together on the vaudeville stage. And he does. He comes up with an act. About 9 weeks later, he's on stage, August 14th, 1888, playing Casey. Casey at the Bat, one-man show. It's estimated that Hopper performed the poem more than 10,000 times in his life on stage, but that's not the only place he performed the poem. Now, this is the Springfield, New Jersey Library, and Debbie, who is the head librarian at the library, actually played that thing for me. That thing is a big cylinder in there, and it makes noise, goes round and round, and you could play a Sousa march, or you could play Casey at the Bat on there. She happened to have a Sousa march. That piece of furniture that played a cymbal was in some house, or was in a house. There was a hermit that lived in Springfield, New Jersey. He had no known heirs. He had all this stuff in his house, so they took it out of his house after he passed away. And they had some room. They had a big room at the library, and they decided to change the room into a little Springfield, New Jersey museum. And you give talks there because they have a lot of room there, and the projectors back there and all that other stuff. But if you had one of those in the 1890s, in your house, you could hear Casey at the Bat because of this guy, Russell Hunting. Russell Hunting was an actor, entertainer, and he was an early sound recordist, and he recorded it in 1893 and 1898, and he used a heavy Irish brogue, and why not? Because Casey was, from the, no, they played the cylinder. That was on the cylinder, not on the disc. That really worked. And Jerry had a tryout with the Brooklyn Dodgers, Elise, and Roy Campanella was there. But anyway, scouting him. But anyway, let's get back to Hunting. So he does it in 1893, does it again in 1898. Both times he used a heavy Irish brogue. In 1905, John Kaiser goes over to Menlo Park in New Jersey and records it for Thomas Edison. Hopper's version is recorded for Victor. Not RCA Victor yet, but Victor. That comes out in 1906. And if you're around in 1905, 1906, and you have one of those, and that's from Sagway, Quebec. I speak on cruise ships, and we stopped in Sagway, Quebec in October of 2019. And this guy had this big garage, and he had all this stuff in the garage, including this Victrola. So if you had the Kaiser record, or if you had the Hopper record, all you had to do is crank it up, throw it on the turntable there, and you got to hear Casey at the Bat. And that thing works too, by the way. Hopper would be the first to commit the verse to film. That would be in 1922, a short subject film by Lee DeForest. Wallace Beery starred in a 1927 version of the film. The comic Jerry Colonna recorded a rendition for Disney, which later provided the basis for a 1946 Disney cartoon. Jackie Gleason performed it on his TV show in the 1950s. Johnny Bench, Tug McGraw, others, George Steinbrenner / Billy Martin, voiced the poem, often in orchestral settings. Billy and George did it for the Tampa PBA. But the funny thing about that, they really didn't push it, and it becomes huge. Casey at the Bat You know, written in 1888, and here I am in 1965, 83 years later, and I have to read it, and yet here it's there. No big deal. Absolutely no big deal. But Casey is the first foray into society, into culture from baseball. And then there's this. Ball game today at the Polo Grounds. If you see the sign, ball game today at the Polo Grounds, what are you thinking? Or let's go back to, say, 1907. What are you thinking when you see this sign in a New York City subway next to Dr. Zinmore's Zitz ads? Because I'm sure they were around in 1907. Well, there was a songwriter by the name of Jack Norworth. And he is looking at this sign as he's on the subway. Baseball game today at the Polo Grounds. You know, one of those subway placards that you probably ignore most of the time. And anyway, he's thinking, and he comes up with an idea. Let's write a song about baseball. And he goes to a guy he knows, Albert von Tilzer, another songwriter, and they put together this song about baseball. Now, Jack Norworth, he was going out with a woman who was a woman's suffragette. She pushed for women's rights, and I think he kind of sort of wrote this song from the viewpoint of his ex-girlfriend. She's gone by this point, but she kind of leaves an impression on him. And he's the lyricist, and Von Tilzer puts the music to it, and it is Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And there is Harry Carey. I worked with Harry Carey in 1994 and 1995. Let me just see what's in the chat. Another legend, the real Casey, was Dennis Casey of the 1885 National League Baltimore Orioles. Could be. But let's talk about this guy, Harry Carey, who I worked with 1994-95. What you don't see here is Harry is singing the national anthem, rather the national anthem, Take Me Out to the Ball Game, in between the top of the seventh and the bottom of the seventh inning, and he sings it rather badly. What you don't see here are his six best friends named Bud, as in Budweiser. But this becomes a Wrigley Field tradition where Harry would sing it badly, but it had to be badly. And after Harry passed, the Cubs continued that tradition. And the tradition was somebody famous would come in, sing the national anthem, had to sing it badly. You couldn't sing it well, you had to sing it badly. But what is Take Me Out to the Ball Game? Well, there are four parts actually, but three different parts to the keep calling it the national anthem, to Take Me Out to the ball game. One is the prelude, where Katie Casey is talking to, we presume, her boyfriend. Maybe it's her brother, maybe it's a father, maybe it's just a friend, but they're going back and forth. What are we going to do on this date? And yeah, she's kind of, the guy wants to take her out to a play or something, and she wants to go out to the baseball game. And they're going back and forth, and she says, this is what you're going to do. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if we ever get back, for we will root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. And then it goes into Katie and why she's such a baseball fan, and she knows all the players by heart, even though they're not wearing names on their back or numbers on their back. And she's not afraid to scream and yell at an umpire's call, which is totally unlike what a woman would do. In fact, a woman really wasn't welcomed at the baseball game in 1908. It was unladylike for a woman to hang out at the baseball game. But here's Katie Casey, and she knows how to get the guys going. And then they go back to Take Me Out to the ball game. It could have been a women's liberation song. In fact, the Washington Post, an op-ed piece in 2019, argued that that was one of the first women's liberation songs ever written, although it was written by a guy possibly from the viewpoint of his old girlfriend, Jack Norwith. Harry sung it. Harry actually gave it a new life on WGN TV, where Cubs games were shown around the country when Harry was the broadcaster of the Chicago Cubs. So the song is written in 1908. The songwriters are Jack Norwith and Albert von Tilzer, and coincidentally, they never saw a baseball game. Norwith would see a baseball game finally in 1928. Von Tilzer would see a baseball game 32 years later in 1940. But the song would become famous on the vaudeville stage because Norwith had a new wife, or a wife, in 1908 who sung the song. Her name, Nora Bayes. She popularized that song along with another song, Shine On, Harvest Moon. Now, Shine On, Harvest Moon is out there. It's hardly probably played, except maybe on Pandora, maybe on Sirius XM. But Take Me Out to the Ball Game is played every day somewhere between late February and probably November 1st. Every day somewhere in the United States or in Canada, maybe in Japan with Japanese words to it. It is probably the most enduring song that was written in 1908, along with Shine On, Harvest Moon. And it takes on a life of its own. Now, baseball did not play it at a stadium until 1934. That was at a game in Detroit, the St. Louis Cardinals, Detroit Tigers World Series in 1934. But the song makes it to movies, makes it to TV, including Groucho Marx. This is Night at the Opera. And the story here is that Margaret Dumont is the backer, the patron of the opera, and she hires Groucho as her manager. First mistake, but it's a movie about the Marx Brothers. And they go over to Italy and they go recruit the world's greatest tenor, while Groucho goes and finds Chico and Harpo, and they have a friend that's a tenor. There's the stowaway scene, Night at the Opera, and all that other stuff. Finally, they open up. It's opening night. And the boys hatch a plan. They're going to knock out the tenor that Margaret Dumont wants. And you need some time to get Alan Jones, who plays the tenor, Jack Jones' father, who's playing Chico and Harpo's buddies, and Groucho is his patron. And they knock out the tenor. They dress this guy up. And as they're killing time, Chico and Groucho Chico and Harpo are handing out sheet music to the musicians in the pit during the overture, and Groucho drops down. The music is Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Groucho drops down and starts selling peanuts and Cracker Jacks to the crowd. It's about baseball. Harpo Marx would return to the song on an I Love Lucy episode in 1955. Numerous movies, numerous TV shows have featured the song. Meanwhile, how many of you know Abbott and Costello and this routine that they did? Who's on first? What's on second? If you're a baseball fan, you know what it is. But do you know what kind of comedy act it was? It's called Rounders. Baseball evolved from a game called Rounders. Well, let's talk about Rounders, the comic style. Basically, you have the idiot, played by Costello, and the wise guy, played by Bud Abbott. And it's Rounders for a simple reason. The idiot keeps asking the wise guy questions, and he's not satisfied with the answers. So they go round and round and round. In this case, Costello would say to Abbott, "Oh, you're with the St. Louis Wolves. They're my favorite team. Let me ask you about the lineup. Who's on first?" And Abbott would say, "Who?" "No, I'm asking you, who's on first?" "Who? Who? What do you mean? Who's on first?" "That's the man's name." And they go round and round and round and round and round and round and round. They could do it for a minute. They could do it for 10 minutes. It was a common vaudeville, burlesque style back in those days. They weren't the first guys to do Who's on First. It was a guy by the name of Mike Musto in St. Louis. It is one of America's classics. Who's on First was a type of vaudeville act, common style. Now, I talked about Rounders, And I don't think any of you really believe that Abner Doubleday founded baseball in 1839 in a field in Cooperstown. I don't think anybody believes that. And as we found out, Abner Doubleday was at the U.S. Military Academy at that time and never did make a trip to Cooperstown. Nor did he ever write about it. But at the turn of the 20th century, from the 1890s into the 1900s, baseball decided to look for its roots. And there was a thing called the Mills Commission, and they decided to look for people who were in Cooperstown back in 1839 or so. And they found this guy by the name of Abner Graves, who was a drunk in Denver. And he told them the story that they wanted to hear, that he was 5 years old. He was in upstate New York, and he was in town, and he watched Abner Doubleday lay out the baseball field. And hey, that's it. We got the story. That's it. It's done. But it's not true. I speak in the Berkshires during the summer. My wife's cousin has a place in the Berkshires, and I speak at various places while I'm up in the Berkshires. And I went to a museum in North Adams, Massachusetts, which is right on the Vermont-Massachusetts border. And there's a nifty art museum, which used to be a mill of some sort there. And across the street, there's a little storefront. And it's the Berkshires Baseball Museum. It basically honors Jack Chesborough, who won 41 games with the New York Yankees' predecessors, the New York Highlanders in 1904, and Jeff Reardon, who was a relief pitcher who started with the Mets and had some really good years in Montreal. But anyway, in the storefront, there is a copy of an article from a paper from 1792 or somewhere around there, talking about how baseball, B-A-S-E, capital B-A-L-L, 2 words, baseball, was played in the Berkshires back in 1792. And it lends credence to the fact that baseball probably evolved from the English game rounders. So the most famous baseball comedy routine, rounders, baseball, evolves from rounders. Anyway, did Abbott and Costello pay Michael Musto, St. Louis comic, $15 for the routine? Not known, but I have a friend by the name of John Joseph. He's a comic that lives in Huntington. Finally got back to work this weekend at the Comedy Cellar after not working for 14 months. He's from Huntington. And we were talking one day because he does an offshoot of the Who's on First musically instead of baseball. But anyway, he's telling me, oh, of course they paid Michael Musto $15 for the routine. They had to. By the way, John Joseph's mentor was somebody you might have heard of, the comedian Alan King. He said, well, they must have paid. But my other buddy, Max Docelli, who was on the seas for 40 years entertaining, said, come on, we're comedians. We steal everything. In fact, we don't even know if Musto really came up with the routine. There's some murkiness there saying this guy did it or that guy did it, but it's attributed to Musto that he came up with the routine. And he didn't do it as well as Abbott and Costello. They ended up with the routine back around 1936 or so. It was suggested that Abbott did a version of this routine before meeting Costello on the burlesque circuit. Not verified, it's just a rumor. But we do know this, that they do get it in 1936 after they are together. Takes them a little while to round it up. Meanwhile, they get a shot on the Kate Smith radio show on CBS, which was one of the big radio shows back in 1938. And they've refined it by this point. They might have gotten some help from Costello's writer, John Grant, and a veteran comedy writer, Will Glickman, who in the 1960s was still writing scripts for Car 54, Where Are You? And they get on the Kate Smith show, and the rest is history. It is a overwhelming smash success. They killed it. They killed it. And it launches their career into another stratosphere. They performed it at the White House for Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower. Performed it in the movies, on radio, on TV, and Abbott and Costello were, quote unquote, enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame around 1956. And there is a constant loop of Abbott and Costello doing the routine that plays up in Cooperstown. Meanwhile, about 15 years ago, Vin Scully, the Los Angeles Dodgers announcer who started in Brooklyn in 1950 as a Fordham student at the age of 21, is looking at his monitor and he sees this picture. The picture is of who? Who was a Dodger player from South Korea. This is what Vinny sees. Who? And he asks, or he says, now we know the answer to the eternal question of who's on first. Ladies and gentlemen, there is who. Who's on first? There is a Watt on second. There was a player by the name of Watt who played with Washington in the 1920s before this routine became famous. So we now know who's on first, what's on second, but I guarantee you this, there's never been a player on any level that played third base whose name was, I don't give a darn. About 3.5 years ago, I went up to Hyde Park, went to see Franklin Roosevelt, because I do talks. I talk about the 1936 Berlin Olympics and why Roosevelt green-lighted the American team to go to Nazi Germany in 1936. I do a talk on the early days of TV, and the first television that was commercial in the United States was at Flushing Meadow, 1939 World's Fair, April 30th, when Roosevelt is on. And about the green light letters, which is part of this baseball talk. So I wanted to ask him about all these things. Oh, Franklin and Eleanor, they were really good. They were a little stiff, you know, well-dressed, but they were a little stiff. They had books there, hard to turn the books, though, because they were also stiff. But I got my answers. I got my answers as to why they went, or the United States team went to Berlin in the summer of 1936. The answer actually came from a guy I worked with. You might have heard of him, Marty Glickman, once the fastest kid in Brooklyn. And he basically said to me one day when we were talking about, because I worked with him with the broadcast school in the 1980s, he said, I wanted to win the gold medal in the 4x100 relay because I wanted to stick it in the Fuhrer's face. I wanted to show him that a Jew could win a medal. And Roosevelt felt it would be unfair to the athletes if they couldn't go, even though they were legitimizing the Hitler regime. Being on TV in 1936, no big deal for him. He had the fireside chats. He was used to large crowds, just another day in the office. As far as the green light letter, that comes after Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. And Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who is the commissioner of baseball, knows a little bit about baseball history because in 1918, not because of the Spanish flu, but because of World War I, the baseball season was truncated and the World Series was played the first week or so in September as opposed to the end of the month. The Boston Red Sox would win that World Series, even though the American League owners said, let's pack it up, forget about the World Series. But the Red Sox would win the World Series based on the left arm of Babe Ruth, who set a record for most consecutive scoreless innings in the World Series, which Whitey Ford eventually would break. But Babe Ruth, people forget, he was a great, great pitcher. Anyway, Landis writes a letter to Franklin Roosevelt. What are we supposed to do? We cut the season in 1918. Do we play? Do we not play? We need guidance from you. And up at Hyde Park, I got the guidance that Roosevelt gave to Landis. I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going. Baseball provides a recreation which does not last over 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Well, hasn't seen a Yankee Red Sox game over the last 10 years, right? 4-hour games, 5-hour games, which could be gotten for very little cost. Well, Roosevelt, his class could pay $80 for a bleacher seat at Yankee Stadium at opening day, or $600 behind home plate. And incidentally, I hope that night games can be extended because it gives an opportunity to the day shift to see a game occasionally. Baseball is so interwoven with the culture and the culture with baseball that Roosevelt sees it as a morale booster to get your mind off of the war. Go enjoy a baseball game. And there were minor leagues, and there was even a women's league at that point that Phil Wrigley put together in the Midwest. The Bells of the Diamond, I think that is. That was the women's league that lasted from 1943 to 1952. The movies, they're going to put me in the movies. They put Babe Ruth in the movies 10 times. A 1920 silent film called Heading Home starred the Babe as a, what else? Baseball star. He starred in Babe Comes Home. Sounds like another baseball movie. 1927 silent movie, but there is no print that has survived because the way movies were made back in those days, if you did not take care of the print would disintegrate. Yes, Ruth still holds the record for pitching 14 innings in a World Series game, winning 2-1 and drove in the Sox first run. Absolutely correct. He was a great player. When they talk about baseball's greatest players, they start with number 2 because they know who number 1 was. Ruth also appeared in a Harold Lloyd silent movie in 1928 called Speedy. He's playing himself. You can see the clip up on YouTube. He's signing autographs for kids or whatever. He hails a cab. Harold Lloyd happens to be the cab driver. Take me to Yankee Stadium. And it's a memorable cab ride for both Ruth and Harold Lloyd's character. Altogether, Ruth was in 10 movies. The first one, Heading Home, the baseball star. The last one, Pride of the Yankees, or the Lou Gehrig story, which was done in 1941 or so. Mike Donlin was the first baseball player who jumped to the silver screen, but he also jumped to the stage and into vaudeville. He was a pretty good player, played with the New York Giants, the baseball idol of Manhattan. Career 333 hitter, but John McGraw couldn't really count on him all that much because he would take multiple breaks from the game to perform on stage and in vaudeville where he could make money than playing a baseball or being a baseball player. He retired for good after 1914 season. He went into the movies. He too typecast immediately right off the bat, which also featured his New York Giants manager, John J. McGraw, who himself was part of the movie industry at that point. So who I think that's number 1 baseball player of all time, it's got to be the Babe, both pitching and hitting. Anyway, Fort Lee Library in New Jersey. For those of you who don't know, the parking lot for the Fort Lee, New Jersey Library used to be where the a big portion of the movie industry was back in the 19-teens when the movie industry started. And if you go into the Fort Lee Library parking lot, you'll see all these signs talking about the old days when movies were shot there. In terms of the baseball idol of Manhattan, Donlin, he was in at least 53 movies. That's not Gary Cooper. That's Lou Gehrig. And Lou Gehrig is starring in a Western called Rawhide. Makes no sense. Makes no sense at all because Lou grew up in New York City, went to college in New York City in Columbia, played for the New York Yankees, had a home in New Rochelle. The road in New Rochelle down the road here is called Lou Gehrig Way. But here he is at Grand Central Terminal saying goodbye to New York because he's going out west, because he's bought a ranch in Montana, because he can't deal with the rat race anymore. He can't deal with the pressure of being the Yankee first baseman, so he's retiring. And he's retiring to a ranch with his sister. His sister. He's married. He's married to Ellie at the time with his sister. But anyway, it's only a movie because he's got to relax in solitude. Movie doesn't go anywhere. It's a terrible movie, but there is an importance to this movie. Since it was shot in 1938, before he's diagnosed with the ALS, doctors can actually look at this movie and see how far the disease progressed between 1938 and their first examination in 1939. They could see his leg movements, they could see his arm movements, they could see how he turns his head or nods his head and all that other stuff. So it does provide some valuable early medical information on the disease because here they got a guy, at least on video, that they could start looking at least going back a year and a half. And there was also some Foxtone movies of him as well. So they could actually see how he was moving. Odd thing about Ruth and Gehrig, who batted 4th in the lineup, Ruth who batted 3rd in the lineup, is that they made contributions to the medical community. Ruth would end up with throat cancer. And he would be one of the first people in the United States that chemotherapy was experimented upon. It helped him a little bit, and then he went downhill. And I'll talk a little more about his last appearance at Yankee Stadium in a couple of minutes. But both Ruth and Gehrig did make some marks in medical research. The film, 1938, and it's called Rawhide. Bugs Bunny played well, he was the heckler. He was out in right field. The place looked like the Polo Grounds, as a matter of fact. He's out in right field, and he's heckling the Gas House Gorillas, who are beating the teetotalers. I could beat you with one arm tied behind my back. And, you know, he was not a drunk, because he's only drinking carrot juice, so he's not getting drunk. But he is the heckler, and the Gas House Gorillas take him up on his offer that he could beat them with one arm tied behind his back. And Bugs beats the Gas House Gorillas. Madonna jumping into the arms of Rosie O'Donnell. Gina Davis back there. Tom Hanks is in this movie, League of Their Own, about the Phil Wrigley League of women who were recruited from softball teams in the Midwest to form their own, eventually, hardball league. Tom Hanks is in this movie. He plays a character based on Jimmy Fox, the great slugger from the Philadelphia A's and the Boston Red Sox. And the famous Hanks line in this one is, "There's no crying in baseball." And there is Gary Cooper, Pride of the Yankees, which was Babe Ruth's last film. There is Kevin Costner and Tim Robbins and Bull Durham. Costner, the veteran catcher who never makes it to the major leagues, but is important to a baseball team because he's a veteran catcher, and they want him to work with guys with $1 million arms and 10-cent heads, like this guy, Tim Robbins. Susan Sarandon is in there. This might be a family audience, so I'll just say she's friends with the two of them. That is Bull Durham. And that was based on Ron Shelton, who was the writer of it, played minor league baseball with the Baltimore Orioles. And the character Tim Robbins plays is based on Steve Dalkowski, who could throw a ball over 100 miles an hour, but had no control of his life off the field either. And that becomes this movie. When the Brooklyn Dodgers and Walter O'Malley decided that Robert Moses is too formidable an opponent, and that the Mayor Christopher in Los Angeles is willing to give him all this land for nothing, and he jumps on that opportunity, Dodger players became hot commodities in the movies and the television. Here, Jerry Lewis is talking to Pee Wee Reese, Don Zimmer is in the back there, about what he wants done in this particular movie, which is called The Geisha Boy. Robert Redford was in The Natural. Kevin Costner. And by the way, I think, Linda, you probably have the book The Natural in the library. You probably have some of the DVDs of the movies I'm talking about. The Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner talking to Joe Jackson about playing in the cornfield in Iowa. Last year, the Yankees and White Sox were supposed to play in the cornfield, but COVID knocked that out. There was Joe Jackson talking to Costner in this movie. Billy Beane, the New York Mets' third #1 pick in 1980. And he signed with the Mets and washed out as a player, but became a baseball administrator, the smartest man in baseball. All you have to do is ask him, he'll tell you that. Used analytics, Michael Lewis, the book Moneyball turned into the movie Moneyball, and there's Brad Pitt playing Billy Beane. And again, this should be in the library as well. Walter Matthau, the Bad News Bears, the manager or coach of the Bad News Bears. Chico Bell, Bonds, Walter Matthau, one of my favorite actors, whether it was in The Fortune Cookie, The Odd Couple with Jack Lemmon, or Grumpy Old Men. Walter Matthau was great in any role. And he played the same role in all of those movies with Lemmon. And Lemmon played the same role in all those movies with Matthau. Major League, there were two of them, Charlie Sheen in that one. And there I am. This is October of 2018, and I am in Pittsburgh. And that is the only remaining part of Forbes Field. It's right in the middle of the University of Pittsburgh. For those of you who are Yankee fans, to my right there, if you walk a little while, there is a spot behind the wall where the ball landed that Bill Mazeroski hit to win the World Series over the Yankees in Game 7. And there's that famous video of Yogi looking up with the ball going over the fence. The reason I have this picture in there, Bing Crosby became the owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1946, the same year that Bob Hope became the part owner of the Cleveland Indians. Both Hope and Crosby, the road to, they both bought minor pieces of Major League Baseball teams. Hope was a native of Cleveland after growing up, after being born in London, moving over to Cleveland, and he outlasted a whole bunch of ownerships before he decided to chip in his share of the team. Danny Kaminsky, also had a piece of the Seattle Mariners when that team started in 1977. But the reason I bring that wall up is because Bing Crosby convinced somebody putting together a movie called Angels in the Outfield to shoot part of the movie in Pittsburgh at Forbes Field. These are not all the movies, just a handful of movies. Pride of the Yankees, Bull Durham, Major League, Angels in the Outfield, Fields of Dream, Geisha Boy, Bad News Bears, The Natural, Moneyball, just some of the movies that made based on baseball. I talked about Babe Ruth and chemotherapy. In 1979, I was working at WGRC Radio, Nanuet, New York, 500 watts, and also moonlighting at WNEW AM, doing news. Station of William B. Williams, Bob Fitzsimmons at that point. I don't think Gene Clavin was there anymore at that point. Julie LaRosa was there. Julie LaRosa, who I knew from there and also from singing national anthems at Shea Stadium. But anyway, back in 1979, I'm 23 years old, and I run into this guy by the name of Nat Fine. Nat Fine was a photographer for Orange and Rockland Utilities. And he also had a little shop in Piermont, New York, of pictures. He takes this picture in 1948. He's working for the New York Journal-American. And I asked him about the picture. This picture wins the Pulitzer Prize. And you can see photographers there on the first base side taking pictures of the Babe. And I've had 4 major scoops in my life, so I know what it takes to have a scoop. It's not a matter of doing your job well. It's a matter of just being in the right place at the right time and getting lucky. That's all. That's all it is. To get a major scoop, you got to be lucky. It doesn't take any ability just to be in the right place. But anyway, so I'm talking to Nat about this, and I ask him about it. And he says, well, he's in the Yankee clubhouse, the third base side. At that point, all the photographers are taking pictures of Babe getting dressed, knowing that's the last time that they're ever going to see him in a uniform. He's in really, really, really bad shape. But he struggles, he gets dressed and all, and he struggles to get out to the third base line where he's introduced. And Nat decides not to go with those guys. He decides to follow Babe going up the tunnel out to the field, and he gets to the top of the dugout, and he takes this picture of Babe. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning picture. Unfortunately, Nat would lose his job in 1965 when the New York World, the Herald Tribune, and the Journal American all merged. They didn't need all those photographers, and he had to do something else. But this is a Pulitzer Prize winning picture. Homer Simpson scores the winning run as the Springfield nuclear power plant ends up winning a championship and against a bunch of Major League Baseball players, etc. Smithers with the championship trophy and Monty Burns, the owner of the power plant. TV and baseball. I told you, Dodgers. They were in, and they were wanted out in L.A. Here's Sandy Koufax. I'm not sure who Sandy Koufax is signing that autograph to. Is it Wilbur Post, played by Alan Young, or Mr. Ed. But anyway, Sandy was on that show. Leo DeRocher was on the Munsters. He signs Herman to a contract. Doesn't work out, but that's the show. Gilligan's Island. On the right is Frenchie Lefevre, Jim Lefevre. On the left is Al Ferrara, who once said that he knew he made it to the major leagues when he saw his face on one of these, a baseball card. I asked Jim Lefevre one day, I said, what were you doing on Gilligan's Island? He said, well, we were there to shrink Gilligan's head. We shrunk heads, and we were going to have him for dinner. A typical Gilligan's Island story. Johnny Roseborough was on Dragnet, 1967, 1968, somewhere around there. The Dodger owner, O'Malley, I hate to bring that name up in polite company. There are some people all these years later, 64 years later, who never have forgiven Walter O'Malley for moving the Dodgers from Ebbets Field to Brooklyn. But anyway, he appeared with the Rifleman star and the one-time Brooklyn Dodgers first baseman Chuck Connors in the 1965 episode of Brandon. Willie Davis, the Dodgers center fielder, acted in The Love Machine, Jerry Lewis's Which Way to the Front, and The Flying Nun. Johnny Roseborough, Dragnet 1968, Brooks Law, Kraft Suspense Theater, Mr. Ed, Experiment in Terror. Now, if I'm live with you, I'd be asking this question: who are these people? I'd wait for you to answer, but I'm on Zoom, so I'm going to give you the answer. On the left is Phil Silvers. The Phil Silvers Show, You'll Never Get Rich, Bilko Show, which was on CBS in the 1950s. On the right is Steve Bilko. Steve Bilko, who lent his name to the Bilko Show. He was one of these players too good, way too good for playing in minor league baseball, the Pacific Coast League, but not quite good enough to hold a regular job in Major League Baseball. A prolific home run hitter in the Pacific Coast League, Ned Hiken, who created the Phil Silvers Show, fell in love with the name Bilko and the player Bilko, and that's how that show was named. Donna Reed, Brady Bunch, Mr. Ed, Munsters, Phil Silvers Show, also known as You Never Get Rich or the Bilko Show, all had baseball players like the Bilko Show. And one day I'm talking to Yogi, and I said, "You were on the Bilko Show?" And Yogi said, "I was in the Bilko Show." I said, the premise of the whole show, by the way, I'll give it to you now, was a bunch of New York Yankees make a cameo appearance in the middle of Kansas at Fort Baxter for no explained or unexplained reason. They just show up. The show was shot in the Bronx, which is why they showed up, because they were around. But anyway, so I'm talking to Yogi one day. He says, "Yeah, you were on the Bilko." "Yeah, I was on the Bilko Show," because Yogi was everywhere in the 1950s. Commercials, playing baseball, What's My Line, Bilko Show. Anyway, so I said, "What were you doing in Kansas?" He said, "We weren't in Kansas. We're in the Bronx." I said, "Yeah, I know you were in the Bronx, the Biograph Theater Studios. I know you were in the Bronx. But, you know, what was the point of the Yankees being on that show?" He said, "Well, you know, I got up, I went across the George Washington Bridge, went on across Bronx Expressway, we went to the studio, we were there, we left, and that was that." At that point, I decided, you know what? Yogi's right. They were in the Bronx. Moose Stubing, speaking of the Bronx, Moose Stubing, born in 1932 in the Bronx, once the manager of the Anaheim Angels, but he'll probably be remembered more for this guy, Gavin McLeod, as Captain Merrill Stubing on the Love Boat. See, Aaron Spelling was the producer of a lot. He called himself the King of Schlock. He had Charlie's Angels. He had The Love Boat. He had Fantasy Island. He had Dynasty and a whole bunch of other shows. But he was a big baseball fan. And he used to go to the baseball encyclopedia and go through it page by page by page, looking for the names for his TV characters. And he stumbles on Moose Stubing. Moose Stubing, perfect for The Love Boat. I once asked Moose about it. I said, "Do you ever get anything out of it?" He said, "No, but I know that he was named after me." John Forsythe, who was in one of Aaron Spelling's bigger hits, Dynasty, back in the 1980s. But he started out in his career in acting as the public address announcer at Ebbets Field for the Brooklyn Dodgers in the 1950s, and he would go on to be in one of Spelling's biggest hits, Dynasty. And there he is, John Forsythe to the right, to the left, and to his right is Jack Lemmon. He came full circle. He started announcing for the Dodgers, and he's on the field playing in a celebrity game to raise money. And there is Jack Lemmon. Jack Lemmon, remember I said he and Mathau, and I really enjoyed them? Well, Jack Lemmon was in The Odd Couple. And he's playing Felix Unger, and of course, Walter Matthau is playing Oscar Madison. And you know the story. Can two divorced men live together without driving each other crazy? Well, that was from the TV show, actually. And so the movie, 1980, part of it's shot at Shea Stadium. And the scene is this. Jack Lemmon calls Walter Matthau at Shea Stadium, and I know exactly which phone he called him on because you could hardly see the field from the phone that he was called on. It was next to the official scorer's booth in a corner. Anyway, so Felix calls Oscar, what do you want for dinner? And Oscar leaves to answer the phone to talk to Felix. And on the field, Pittsburgh Pirates playing the New York Mets, and Bill Mazeroski hits into a triple play. And Oscar says, hold on, what happened? Oh, Madison, you missed the best play of the season, all that. And, you know, it's a typical odd couple squabble between Felix and Oscar. But there's Jack Lemmon, and there is John Forsythe. Bob Uecker, a guy who I've known for about 40 years, Mr. Baseball. I bet you they put me in the front row. Well, Bob Uecker was a backup catcher with the Milwaukee Braves, and then the St. Louis Cardinals, and the Philadelphia Phillies, and the Atlanta Braves, and he finished out his career, undistinguished as it was, working with the Braves in their community relations department. But he was also working on a stand-up routine. And Al Hurt, the trumpet player, walks into the place where he's performing. He sees Uecker, and he calls up Johnny Carson and says, hey, Johnny, I got a guy for you. Bob Uecker. He's a comedian. He's as funny as can be. I think you should book him. Well, Carson does book him, or Freddie DeCover, or whoever was doing the booking, and Uecker kills him. And as a comic, there's no bigger honor back in those days when Carson was on than to be invited to sit down to talk to him for a few minutes on the couch. Now, Uecker did make a lot of appearances on Carson's show, but Carson initially didn't know who he was. And in the first break, he says, is it true that you were a baseball player? And Uecker said, I have one of these, a baseball card. So I guess I was a player. Whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. Baseball on Broadway, the Damn Yankees play. Damn Yankees, back in the mid-1950s. Remember, the Yankees winning everything in the 50s. They did not make it to the World Series in 54. They lost to the Dodgers in 55. You probably remember Johnny Padres beating them. And next year finally came. And in 1959, the Dodgers would play the White Sox in the World Series. Yeah, yes, he did. And he refused, so it became Bill Mazeroski. Absolutely correct about that. Didn't want to hit into the triple play. Anyway, Joe Hardy sells his soul to the devil, so Washington can finally beat the damn Yankees. Also, the other big song, besides you got to, whatever Lola wants, Lola gets, is you got to have heart. And there are the Mets from 1969 after winning the World Series. On our stage tonight, our big shoe, here they are, the Mets. Now, Jerry Stiller, Stiller and Mara, Jerry Stiller is my cousin, was my cousin, he passed away. And I do a TV talk where I'll talk about Jerry and his adventures, the 36 times that he and Ann were on the Sullivan Show. And Ed started out as a sports writer, and he had to be as pleased as punch, to quote Hubert Humphrey back in those days, that he had the Mets on the stage. Ed was a sports groupie, and if there was any sports star in his audience, he would call them out to take a bow and all that, or tell them to stand up and take a bow. But anyway, Ed's got to be in his glory here when he sees the world champion New York Mets singing, "You Gotta Have Heart." And speaking of that guy, that little guy, the Wiener side got the size, the Stiller size, they were all 5'4", which I used to remind them about. Anyway, there he is with my kids back in the 1990s. And that's a great segue. I'm a radio guy. I know all about segues, and it's a segue into this. Jerry Seinfeld, George Steinbrenner, The Seinfeld Show, and George Steinbrenner's presence on The Seinfeld Show. And he loomed large. Marty Appel, who used to be the Yankee PR guy, told me that Larry David, who wrote the shows, had some real inside knowledge. You couldn't get more inside than the guy on the right, George Steinbrenner. There were storylines suggested by George to Larry David, and Larry did put them into 22-minute neat scripts. One of them, Missing George, another board meeting moved, another different uniforms. Missing George actually has my cousin Jerry as one of the main characters. Now, I'll give you the background on the story. George Steinbrenner basically was the guy who owned American Shipbuilding in Tampa. And the offices are in Tampa. And there's a guy who's working for him who George kind of, well, you know, I don't know. He thought he hung out with bad people. But anyway, so it's Friday. George leaves the office and assumes everybody's gone for the weekend and I'll be back Monday morning. Well, George used to get into the office like at about 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and he notices this guy's car is still in the parking lot, and all of a sudden, alarms ring in George's head. This guy, he's not here. His car is here. He must have, you know, those guys he hangs out with, something must have happened to him. So George calls the Tampa police. They put out an all-points bulletin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That becomes the TV show. The guy showed up in the afternoon. He just went away with his friends. But it becomes the basis of the TV show. George Costanza is the Yankee traveling secretary, played by Jason Alexander. And George thinks that because the car is still in the lot, that something happened to George Costanza, and he goes to Frank Costanza, my cousin Jerry, Frank Costanza's house, and thinks he has to tell him the bad news that he thinks George is dead. So he knocks on the door. The actor playing Steinbrenner, voiced by Larry David, says, "We think George is dead." And Jerry's giving him one of these looks. You traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? You traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? Highlight of the show, actually. And, you know, George turns up eventually. That was, by the way, Jay Buhner had a pretty good career with Seattle after he was traded by the Yankees to Seattle for Ken Phelps, who was a total washout with the Yankees. Board meeting moved. Well, if George liked your food, and your food was his food. So they have a board meeting, and at Yankee Stadium, somebody brings in some outside food. George decides, hey, where'd you get the food? Let's move the board meeting there, and they made a TV show out of it. Different uniforms. George with the minor league Tampa Yankees affiliate in the Florida State League, which no longer exists, although the Tampa team still exists there. George decided, let's try out a different uniform. Let's see how it worked. It was a polyester type uniform. It didn't work. Just 3 of the storylines suggested by George. George was actually on the show, or they wanted to put him on the show. You can go up to YouTube and see the scene with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. George is not very good in the scene. It's terrible. And you could go look at it for yourself and judge for yourself, but you can see why it was cut out. Seinfeld was quoted saying he actually did a scene in the show and it was terrible. We couldn't use it. We cut him out. He wasn't funny, probably because he thought he was Olivier. I don't remember exactly what went wrong with it, but it was quite an awkward situation. Keith Hernandez ended up on the Seinfeld show after his career. George Costanza is jealous because Keith is now Jerry's good buddy instead of George. And that's the whole show. Keith Hernandez had no idea who Jerry Seinfeld was prior to the show, but his agent, Scott Boras, called him and said, hey, you want to be on Seinfeld? He said, what's that? Boras said, you'll go out first class by plane. They'll put you up in a nice hotel for a week. And, oh, by the way, they'll give you 15 grand. Keith was ready to play himself on the show, and apparently they were good friends now. George was the host of Saturday Night Live in the 1970s. One of the skits is that he plays every position for the Yankees. He's the manager, he's the coach, the general manager, and the owner. And you know what? They weren't very far from the truth, other than the fact he couldn't play in the field. George Steinbrenner at Saturday Night Live. And also Saturday Night Live in the early days, Garrett Morris portraying the character Chico Escuela, New York Mets. Baseball, been very, very good to me. But baseball on TV has faded, like it has in a lot of other areas, except first show of Jeopardy this year. I was going to drop this because Wally Pip played for the Yankees 96 years ago. His last game was in May of 1925, 96 years ago. But as a kid, I used to hear the expression, don't get Wally Pipp, which meant stay, you know, go to work, even if you're sick, because somebody else might take your job. And Lou Gehrig did take his job June 2nd, 1925, but he would have taken his job anyway, whether he's sick or not. Pip got beamed, so he had headaches about 5 days earlier. They didn't wear any protective equipment on their head. And Gehrig takes over, but he's tearing up the minor leagues. It's 1925, and Lou is probably at that point, he is roughly, he's born in 1902, so he's 1925, he's 23 years old, and he's ready to play on an everyday basis, and he's simply better than Wally Pipp. But Wally was the answer to a Jeopardy question, season 37, show 1. Who was Wally Pipp? So I decided to keep it in because it was on Jeopardy, September of 2020, first show of the year. Cigarettes in baseball, big deal. Old Gold Cigarettes presenting Babe Ruth in the blindfold cigarette test. And there is Babe, looks like he's up in Sing Sing, up in Ossining, with that thing over his eyes, and these guys look like they're about ready to electrocute him, but no, they're just asking him, identify the cigarette. Old Gold's mildness and smoothness marked it right off the bat as the best. He would die of throat cancer. Chesterfield, the baseball man cigarette. ABC, always buy Chesterfield because Bucky Harris, the manager of the Yankees, smoked it. Oh, so did Bob Elliott, the most valuable player in the National League for the Boston Braves. And Ted Williams, Teddy Ballgame, smoked it. Sam Usual, somebody had to knock out a tooth for him to smoke it. Joe D, he didn't pay for that cigarette. Guaranteed he didn't pay for that cigarette. Ewell Blackwell, who was with the Cincinnati Reds. When you change to Chesterfield, the first thing you'll notice is their mildness. Always milder, better tasting, cooler, smoking the baseball man cigarette. Joe Garagiola and I had a relationship for a long time, basically because I talked to him about game shows, but a longer relationship was with Yogi Berra. They grew up together. They met at the age of 2. Dago Hill, that's what they called it. It's not supposed to be a slur because they called it with a lot of other people. That was what it was in St. Louis, both born in 1925. Joe said to me once, when Yogi steps in it, business-wise, he steps in it. There's Mickey Mantle, who I hated Yoo-Hoo. It was chocolate water. I hated Yoo-Hoo, but I don't know, maybe they put some Cutty Sark in there for Mickey. Moose Skowron, I love talking to Moose Skowron. He had great baseball stories, a good guy. And Joe Pepitone told the gang in Brooklyn, don't break his legs. He's a good guy, because they wanted to break his legs, the gang, so Joe could play first base for the Yankees. Moose gets traded to LA and then back to Washington. And Ellie Howard, the Yankee catcher. When he steps in it, he steps in it. Yogi meets the Oliveri family at New Jersey Country Club in 1955. Yoo-Hoo can't get on the supermarket shelves. So the Oliveris decide, let's see if he likes it, because if he likes it, we have a shot here. Well, he tastes the drink. And they ask Yogi, what do you think? Yogi's on the board of directors, making tons of money because of one drink. And he gets the Yoo-Hoo on the shelves. One time I was in the office, as Dave Kaplan told me this story, and you might have this book at the library. I didn't say everything that I said, or the 10 Rings or whatever, the 2 books that Dave and Yogi co-wrote. Dave ran the Yogi Berra Museum. One time I was in the office and the phone rang. No one else was around. I always answer a ringing phone, so I did. The woman who was calling asked if Yoo-Hoo was hyphenated. I said, no, ma'am, it's not even carbonated. Yoo-Hoo, Yogi sold salads, like Kraft's Italian dressing. For me, it's got everything. Sure makes swell salads. Oh, hey, I had a car, 1966 Capri Chevrolet station wagon. I had a battery. I had to put water in there twice a year, 1973. Well, Yogi, I add water only 3 times a year, Prestolite high-level battery. Yogi, selling Miller Lite. Marv Throneberry, Marvelous Marv of the Mets, also selling Miller Lite. Boot Powell, Jim Honachek, Powell, the former first baseman of the Orioles, Jim Honachek, the the umpire, and John Madden part of that. I worked with Madden between '88 and 2005 on various various radio shows. Yogi, the slugging New York Yankees catcher, this Christmas asked mom and dad for a Shelby, the winner's bike. His teammate was Joe DiMaggio. He's at the Stork Club with Marilyn Monroe. He's got the cigarette, which he didn't pay for. He's got whatever he's drinking, which he didn't pay for. And they're probably getting dinner, which he and Marilyn didn't pay for. On January 14th, 1954, by the way, DiMaggio had short arms and long pockets. And that was told to me by Phil Rizzuto. Anyway, January 14th, 1954, DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe elope in San Francisco. In October of 1954, Marilyn files for divorce, citing only mental cruelty. Over the years, some of the old Yankees have told me it was more than mental cruelty and have explained what it is, but it's hearsay in my mind, and I'm not going to repeat it other than the cruelty aspect was mental when she decided to file for divorce, and it had everything to do with this, the 7-year itch. This is Stamford, Connecticut. In 2017, 26-foot Marilyn was tours the country every summer, and Stamford has street art every year, and this was the street art, part of the street art every summer in Stamford. And behind her is the First Congressional Church, and when the parishioners walked out, the first thing they saw was an uplifted skirt, and she's on the grate there. And there was a church to my left and Marilyn's left, your right as well, up in Stamford, and used to have the side view of Marilyn. That scene, which is now a statue, 26-foot Marilyn. DiMaggio was on the set that day when the subway grate, the hot air came up and blew up her skirt, and he blew up. See, Joe really wanted a few things from his wife. He wanted a stay-at-home wife. He wanted a wife who was going to cook him dinner every night. He wanted a wife who was not more famous than he was, and he wanted a wife who made less money than he was. On all accounts, Marilyn failed. They got divorced. But Joe D. Went on without Marilyn. He was in the records, Simon and Garfunkel's, Mrs. Robinson, We Didn't Start the Fire, Billy Joel, Joltin' Joe, after the 56-game hitting streak. Hey, hey, Joltin' Joe DiMaggio. Did you see Jackie Hit the Ball? That was Duke Ellington. And Mickey by Teresa Brewer. I'm going to concentrate on this one, though, because there's a story behind there. Mrs. Robinson, Paul Simon, Art Garfunkel, back with old friends and bookends. 45s, remember 45s, the A side and the B side, the back with. And you played on the phonograph, and it had the fat middle, so you had to get a disc, or you had to have your phonograph had to pick up something so it would stay on the phonograph. Some of the old Yankees have told me over the years, or used to, because they're almost all gone right now. Anyway, they told me about DiMaggio meeting Paul Simon for dinner. Joe didn't pay for dinner, Paul did. And Joe walks in and he sees Paul Simon. What do you mean, where have I gone? What do you mean, I'm here, I'm with you? I just, I did a Bowery commercial. I'm doing Mr. Coffee. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I haven't gone away. What do you mean, where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? And Paul Simon tries to reason with him, which was the first mistake. He says, Joe, I'm looking for heroes. I was looking for heroes, and I'm looking, and you're gone. You're my hero. I'm 10 years old. I never saw you again after 1951. You were gone. So where'd you go? And he said, I'm here. The Mrs. Robinson song is kind of interesting because it was a little incidental music in the movie, The Graduate, and Mike Nichols and others told Paul Simon, you could probably have a hit with that song if you flushed it out. And he does. And he's got the song Mrs. Roosevelt initially. That's what it's going to be called. And Mike Nichols hears it and he says, no. It's Mrs. Robinson, after the main character in The Graduate. And Joe DiMaggio is in there, and Mrs. Robinson is in there. He's on the Dick Cavett show, he being Paul Simon, and he says, I didn't mean the lines literally. I thought of him as an American hero, and that genuine heroes were in short supply. He also considered Eleanor Roosevelt and Ted Williams, who was in World War II and the Korean War. Joe accepted the explanation, thanked me, we shook hands, said goodnight. He goes on the, Dick Cavett asks more because he knows that Joe D and Mickey didn't like each other. Joe D, when his final year, looked to his left, and here's the blonde god. He looked like a Greek god. He's beautiful. Blonde hair, he's chiseled. His name, Mantle, out of the ground. And Joe is 37 years old, over the hill. Mickey hated Joe because in 1951, in the World Series against the Giants, he trips over a sprinkler. He's running full speed, and he thought DiMaggio loafed on the ball, and he trips over the speaker, rips, the sprinkling system or the drain, tears up his knee, and they hated each other after that. Simon Cavett asked, why didn't you use Mantle's name? And Mickey asked that too. And Paul said, Joe DiMaggio sounds better than Mickey Mantle. And Simon responds, it's all about syllables, Dick. It's about how many beats there are. Terry Cashman, he and I share the same periodontist, who I will see on Monday morning at 8 o'clock in Riverdale. And he wrote a lot of baseball songs in the early 1980s, including Willie, Mickey, and the Duke talking baseball. There's a missing person there. That missing person is Joe DiMaggio. He's airbrushed out of there. DiMaggio asked Terry Cashman, who I knew from way back when, how come I'm not in there? And he says, it's about the 50s. And Joe agreed that, yeah, it's about the 50s, and he played in 50, 51, but he was shell of himself in 50 and 51, and DiMaggio is left out. Scooter, Phil Rizzuto, the Scooter. He is in the song, or he's part of the song, Paradise by the Dashboard Light, Meatloaf's Bad Out of Hell album. And I knew Meatloaf. He lived up here in Westchester. He was his daughter's base softball coach, among other things. And I used to see Meatloaf a lot. And I said, how'd you get Phil? He said, we wanted Phil because we thought it was perfect for our record. Jim Simon was the guy who wrote the song, Meatloaf the performer. And what they wanted Phil to do was talk about, well, I'm going to clean this up. Apparently this guy and this girl are in the back seat of the car, and eventually this guy wants something from this girl, but she only says that, I'll do it if you're going to marry me. And they bring Phil to narrate. He gets on to first, gets to second, gets to third, and he comes home. And if you're old enough, you might remember all of that. If you're young, somebody will explain it to you one day. But anyway, so Scooter is in there, and it takes about 100 takes. He's not being Rizzuto. He finally gets the fact that he's supposed to be Rizzuto, and it's over 100 takes, but he does get the fact that he's Rizzuto. Like George Steinbrenner, he put too much effort into not doing what they were supposed to do, like in the Seinfeld episode. Scooter was told by his kids that the song was about sex. His kids were going to college in the 1970s up in Boston. And I was talking to Scooter one day about that. He said, Huckleberry. He said, he didn't tell me that it was about that Huckleberry Meatloaf. He fooled me, but fooled him, wasn't enough to get rid of the gold record. Baseball cards, my periodontist, who I just talked about, loved the fact that there were cards, inside the cards, there was a stick of bubble gum, which was like biting into a wooden floor. So my periodontist thanks Cy Berger for inventing the baseball card with the bubble gum. But with the baseball card, you could do a whole bunch of things. You could learn how to add, subtract, multiply, divide if you were so interested in finding out the latest statistics. Gambling. I bet you didn't realize gambling. Tom talked about this when we started. Flipping the cards, flipping the cards, flipping the cards. Or business. Should I trade this card for that card? Hey, you made decisions. You made decisions. Today, kids who play Little League Baseball can't make decisions. Somebody else is making the decision for them. Of course, gambling, geography, you can see a team name on the front. Sometimes you'd see Milwaukee or whatever, and then you could look that up. And they made great bicycle flaps. You put the clothespin in the bicycle cylinders or the spokes, and they made great, great noise. Today, there really are no new songs, no new literature really about baseball. Ernest Hemingway wrote about DiMaggio, Old Man in the Sea, which you probably have in the library. Ernest Hemingway, Dave Kaplan's telling me the story, again, the guy who ran Yogi's museum. He says that Yogi's telling the story about the day that he meets Ernest Hemingway in Yankee Clubhouse. And Hemingway is going through, Ernest Hemingway, Mickey Mantle, Ernest Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway, Whitey Ford, back and forth. And he gets to Yogi. Ernest Hemingway, this is Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra, Ernest Hemingway. Yogi sticks out his hand and says, "What paper you write for, Ernie?" Should have said the Kansas City Star. It's just another sport today. Oh, yes, Homer Simpson did make it into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2017 with Casey at the bat. The singer John Fogerty's center field, 45 in 1985. He put that out. League of Their Own and Who's on First. But baseball is not football. There is me interviewing Joe Namath with my buddy Bruce Morton with the ABC logo there. Back in 1988 in Mamaroneck at the Wingfoot Golf Course, a party for the 1969 Super Bowl champion, the New York Jets, the 20th anniversary coming up that year of them winning the Super Bowl. Joe cements the Super Bowl as the most important sports event in the United States, but baseball had been trending downward anyway. 1950, baseball, horse racing, and boxing dominated the American sports scene. Television comes in and it flips everything upside down. Football by 1965 would surpass baseball as the #1 sport in America. This guy, Muhammad Ali, bigger than boxing, a lot bigger than boxing. That's me and him in 1985. But once he's gone in 1982, boxing does not sustain interest, and today it's a fringe sport. Horse racing, same thing. In horse racing, this is Gulfstream in Helendale, Florida. Gulfstream is it's the casinos inside that are propping up horse racing places these days. That's Jim Bouton, ball 4. You have to have that in the library. It's 51 years old now, ball 4. Jim and I used to crisscross. The only time we ever spoke together was at Yogi Berra's museum in 2007. And he went on before me and I came on after him, and we had a nice long conversation until they called me up on the stage because the guy who was supposed to be there wasn't there. They said, "Come on, Evan, get up here now. You're going to do yours now instead of later." And then ended my conversation with Jim. Jim put out the book Ball 4, which humanized baseball players, one of the most influential books of the 20th century, according to the New York Public Library. The baseball commissioner, Bowie Kuhn, told Jim, "Say you made it all up." He said, "I didn't make it all up. Ball 4. I occasionally read it still. It was used as part of the arbitration when Peter Seitz ended the reserve clause. I was in a soccer movie called Sons of Ben that came out in 2015. Soccer has supplanted baseball TV ratings among kids on Saturday's game of the week, as opposed to soccer, which is up against it. The soccer games draw more viewers than the baseball games. The movie called Sons of Ben. And it ain't over until it's over. Mike Dyer was a writer for the Long Island Press back in 1973. He now lives down in Sarasota, Florida. And if you remember the 1973 New York Mets season, it wasn't going well. Tom Seaver was injured. Jerry Grody was injured. There were a whole bunch of other injuries. That was the year that Tug McGraw, when M. Donald Grant went into the Mets clubhouse and gave them a pep talk, and Tug McGraw came running out. "You gotta believe, you gotta believe, you gotta believe." Anyway, September, Yogi's team is still in it. Pittsburgh, mediocre. Chicago, mediocre. But there's very little room for error. 1 or 2 losses, Mets are gone. It's at Shea Stadium. Mets lose. And the writers congregate around the desk. Yogi is there, fielding questions. Mike Dyer, Long Island Press, asks the question, "Is it over?" Yogi said, "It ain't over till it's over." Yogi has been quoted more than anybody else before the Supreme Court of the United States in arguments. Ain't over until it's over. If you see a fork in the road, take it. You better go to their funeral because they won't go to yours if you don't go to theirs. It gets late early out there about the shadows of Yankee Stadium. The future ain't what it used to be. Nobody goes to that restaurant anymore because it's too crowded and there are so many other yogiisms. And I miss my friend Yogi. I used to speak at his library a few times a year, and he would always come up to me afterwards and he'd just pat me on the back. He said, "Good job, kid. Good job, kid." June 26, 2011. That's the last time I was with Yogi. He fell shortly after that and got sick. There he is with Brian Cashman, still the general manager of the New York Yankees. Ain't over until it's over, but it's over. Thank you, Linda, for inviting me. Thank you, everybody else. Any questions or comments? Questions or comments? The floor is yours. Seaver, Felix Mian, Rusty Staub. You should put up my picture with Rusty. Rusty was a good guy, really good guy. But you're right about that. They carried the Mets. Any questions, any comments before I get on out of here? Unmute yourself, Dennis. You got to unmute yourself.
There was a movie that Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle made.
Safe at Home.
Right. It wasn't mentioned. It was a movie of William Frawley was in it also, remember? And it was filmed in Florida,
yep,
if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know, I'm going to tell you something about William Frawley. He was a huge Yankee fan, a huge Yankee fan. And he's on I Love Lucy. And in his contract, it was written that if the Yankees were in the World Series, that he did not have to show up for the filming. He would be written out of the I Love Lucy episodes because he wanted to watch or go back to New York to watch the Yankees in the World Series.
Oh, wow.
William Frawley, that was Safe at Home, and it was a horrendous movie.
Well,
Roger was a really nice guy.
He had a problem working with Vivian Vance when they met.
Yes.
They didn't like each other.
Yes, they did. Anybody else?
Thank you very, very much. I really got a lot out of it. Really.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Rosalind, right? Rosalind M. And you're right about the Mets, and you were right about a lot of the other stuff. And Clemente was supposed to be the guy, and he wasn't. So anyway, I want to thank Linda for inviting me. And I want to thank everybody else who hung in there. Linda, thank you for inviting me. And I'm going to make a recording of this. And thank you, Vera. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. And hopefully we'll see you somewhere down the road, whether it's on Zoom or whether it's live. I got both my shots. And tomorrow, my 35-day period between first shot and last shot and full protection is done. So I am going to head out soon to some.
Thank you very much, Evan. Yep. It was a great presentation. I really appreciated it. And I'm sure our patrons did also.
So thank you. And we'll talk in the future, and I'm going to send you a copy of all this. So we're all done.
Okay, then thank you again. And I'll make sure it goes up on the website.
Yeah, and I'll send it to you. Thank you, and we'll see you somewhere down the line. Bye-bye. Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye. Stay healthy.